What's up, dads? Your boy Big Dave back with another episode of Culture Dads, Age of Sword and Cassette, where two based publishing dads get together to talk about all kinds of art and culture, retrospectives, philosophy, all these things from the perspective of based publishing dads for folkish and dissident minds. What we're going to talk about today is something that you've written some articles about. You've talked about on previous podcasts of ours. You talked about it on other podcasts. And what we're going to talk about today is this framework that you've and you admitted that it's not completely of your invention, but it is branded and re-envisioned in a way to make it more accessible to guys like me, like guys in this sphere that want to understand this. And pretty much what you've developed is this Odinic versus Tyrrhic framework, which is a higher resolution of understanding effectively how the world works and the cycles of power and civilization and, XYZ. So, just give us a rundown of Odinic versus Tyrrhic framework.
Right. So I will first just mention that it's not at all my idea. I've completely just copied it from Georges Dumézil in one of his books, and maybe we'll talk about that book at some stage in this podcast. But what the Odinic Tyrrhic framework is, in a nutshell, is it's the most fundamental dichotomy that describes who we are as peoples, as Indo-Europeans or as Europeans. It's a theological paradigm, but it's a lot more than that too. It has social and political implications as well, and we'll get to those too. But at the end of the day, it is a theological distinction. It's not like a political distinction that has theological implications the other way around. And anyway, the distinction is between the Odinic and the Tyrrhic. And the simplest explanation, that if you want to boil it down into just a sentence, the simplest explanation is that the Odinic is the great man and the Tyrrhic is the preserver of order. So what does that mean? Okay, so to expand a little bit more, we could maybe bring in Hindu theology. Some of the guys that listen might be familiar with this, the Trimurti, which is the Brahma, the creator, Vishnu, the preserver, and Shiva, the destroyer. These are the three cardinal principal gods in the Hindu pantheon. And the creator, preserver, and destroyer, those categories are pretty self-evident. Now, just imagine that you collapse the creator and the destroyer, so Brahma and Shiva, into one person. This is the Odinic. And Vishnu, the preserver, is basically the Tyrrhic. So hopefully that makes it a little bit clearer, and it also ties it into Indian theology, which is obviously a branch of this Indo-European. So, but it's named after the two Germanic gods, Odin and Tyr, or specifically the Norse gods, Odin and Tyr. So I think it's worth talking about those gods to get a better sense of what the categories are about. So Odin is the god of the sky. Specifically, he's the god of the night sky. He's also the god of frenzy and power and magic. So Odin is the god basically of divine madness. And in the lore, in the Germanic and the Norse, mythological lore, he undergoes an esoteric rite to acquire the secret of the runes, right? And also he steals the meat of poetry. He's the god of the wild hunt, the berserker's rage. He's the wanderer. He's this Gandalf type figure that wanders and disguises himself and gives himself thousands of different names. He's this secretive, dynamic, explosive, and kind of dangerous figure. He was the patron god of the upper classes, but not really so much of the folk for the Nordic peoples. He is a dangerous figure, and a lot of folks especially if they know their theology very well, are a little bit sort of hesitant to engage with him because he is a dangerous figure, although he is also the All-Father. So, so that's Odin. Now, Tyr, the other side of this dichotomy, is the god of the sky also, but specifically he's the god of the daytime sky, whereas Odin is the god of the night sky. Tyr is the god basically of justice, of oaths, of covenants. Usually the covenants are related to war, but it's not like, the frenzied battle aspect of war. It's like the covenants are sort of related to the ordered aspect of war. So like the laws of war, treaties that are like concluded after battle's finished and everything. Tyr is kind of the god of order in the Germanic pantheon. He sacrifices his hand as a pledge when the Aesir, so this is like one of the races or tribes of gods, basically, when the Aesir and the wolf Fenrir, which is this malevolent figure, are kind of at an impasse, Tyr sacrifices his hand to kind of break that impasse. And by doing that, he secures the salvation of the gods, and he sort of renders it legal. So he's a bit of a legalistic figure. The Proto-Germanic Tiwaz, which is the sort of earlier incarnation of Tyr, was the god of jurisprudence in war. For the early Germans or Germanics, it was the priesthood of Tiwaz. It was that priesthood's job to interpret whether the letter or the spirit of a treaty was to be observed, and so on and so forth. So this gives you a bit of an idea of the flavor of these two gods. They're very different. Now, they're actually not perfect instantiations of the ideas of like the Odinic and Tyrrhic per se. I actually got this dichotomy, as I mentioned, from Georges Dumézil, and Odin and Tyr are the gods that he uses to illustrate the dichotomy for the Germanic peoples, the Norse peoples. I considered maybe as I was trying to put this together into something a little bit more useful for us, I considered maybe Odinic versus Mithraic, because the Ironic god Mithra actually kind of better captures the preserver of order aspect than Tyr does.
Also, I would like to add that it's useful to use Odin as like an archetype within this framework in that way. But for those of us that are believers and those that read the Edda and everything, Odin is a little bit more complicated than just that. You know what I mean? He's also like a loving father, and he's a dad, and he's the king of the cosmos, and there's passages in there that he's like, he pulls the hatred from men's hearts and gives them peace, and he's more complicated than this like spooky, brooding, wandering wizard kind of guy. Which he's that too. He's probably one of the most dynamic deities like ever written about. He is like so much of everything. So
yeah, absolutely. There's a kind of like, to say that he's the god of power and magic or of frenzy in the sky and everything, that's kind of like a little bit anachronistic. It's not like these gods are, characters in a video game that have these attributes just applied to them or whatever. They are living, breathing, existing figures that have like you say, complicated personalities like any of us, right? Like no person can be sort of boiled down into like, oh, he's just about that. So neither can the gods. But for the purposes, just to make it like a little bit more graspable and like a resolution that we can handle, you kind of have to simplify it in this way, right? Yeah, they're definitely a little bit more complicated than that. But yeah, I was sort of thinking that like Mithra actually is a better figure for what I'm calling the Tyrrhic, but and I mean like all the Germanic gods are war gods basically, and the Tyrrhic is much less warlike than the Odinic. But I didn't want it to seem like these categories map too precisely onto like specific Indo-European peoples. Like the Norse have a Mithraic element or whatever, a Tyrrhic element. And the Iranians have an Odinic element. It's not like that's absent. And so I thought, it's probably better to keep it like within the same pantheon, just for naming purposes. But Odin and Tyr are a pretty close match. They're probably the best match for any pair of gods that are within a single pantheon. So Odinic, Tyrrhic it is. In a nutshell, to sort of sum it up, the Tyrrhic presides over divine order, and the Odinic presides over a no less divine disorder, which is a little bit disconcerting for trads and everything like that. But this is part of our heritage, so it's something it's in there. And to look at it in these categories, it allows you to illustrate and understand things at a level that's kind of unavailable if you use like political categories like left, right, or things like that. So yeah, and that's sort of an overview of what these things are.
Yeah, and you mentioned trads, problematic for trads. Now, at one point, I identified as a traditionalist. You know, I was like, I believe in a tradition. I look at society as it should adhere to a tradition, and I think that traditions are good. And that's me opposed to like somebody that would call themselves a revolutionary. But like, you know, in this framework, and nowadays, I kind of sort of like don't like that moniker. I don't agree with a lot of this stuff, especially since that moniker has been co-opted by people that I don't have anything in common with. You know, people that are looking into theological legalisms from, you know, Bronze Age Middle East to govern how we live our lives today, and stuff that's very much like just like against our nature, and you know, that's just not me. You know what I mean? So I don't know if was I never a traditionalist, or did I just misunderstand traditionalism? It's like I don't know which one it was.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the insights that you gain from this, and I mean, we could break it down in very simple terms and just basically call the Odinic like the founder, and the Tyrrhic the trad or traditionalist side. That is like kind of losing some aspects of it, but it's close enough. Mm-hmm. We're both. That's the thing. One of the insights here is that these things are not exactly opposites, and that every person, and especially every folkhood, like, you know, think of the Greeks or the Romans or the Germanics or the Celts, like as discrete folks, they all have both. So it's kind of like to say that, you know, I'm a trad, but I'm not a revolutionary is like, well, I mean, I don't think anyone can say that, honestly, because there's some aspect of both in all of us, right? Nor can you say that I'm totally anti-tradition unless you're just a so it's like, I mean, you can be about just revolution, like for revolution's sake, but you know, that's nothing to do with us anyway. We're not going to be talking to anybody that's like all about that. So yeah, I mean, like about these the categories, basically the Odinic and the Tyrrhic are not exactly opposites, which is kind of different to, you might think of like, you know, globalist versus nationalist. Those are opposites, basically. Left and right are opposites. The Odinic and Tyrrhic are not opposites, and this is part of why we all have some of both in us. These are complementary forces. So, I mean, the paradigmatic Odinic figure politically is the king, and the paradigmatic Tyrrhic figure would be the priest. But the king is not the opposite of the priest, right? Like in a healthy society, the two rule kind of conjointly together. In Dumézil's discussion, where this comes from, it's a dichotomy in Indo-European conceptions of sovereignty. This is what his book is all about, Mitra Varuna, which is the where he writes about this. He doesn't use the term Odinic Tyrrhic, but that dichotomy it's a dichotomy to do with sovereignty. But when you look, you actually find it in much, much more than politics and rulership and sovereignty. But anyway, there is a kind of collegiality to sovereignty. There's a tension between the king and the priest, but there's also a harmony, or there better be a harmony, or else that's the social order is not going to last very long, right? So that's one thing. These two things are not opposites. Odin is not the opposite of Tyr. The two work together. And the other thing to take away from this is that they're not equals either. It's not like a perfectly equal co-rulership. Both of them govern. but the Odinic presides over the Tyrrhic. The Odinic is kind of the senior partner in the relationship. Both of them are sovereign, but ultimately it's the great man or the founder that prevails over the maintainer of order, or the traditionalist, which is just to say that the god of frenzy prevails over the god of order. And this is why I'm saying that might sort of irk traditionalists a little bit, because, you know, I mean, a lot of people in our spheres that, like, you know, are drawn to being right wing, is the reason why is because they like order and they feel like the world is falling apart and it's becoming too disordered, right? But the idea that the god of frenzy prevails over the god of order is kind of implicit. It's like the implicit structuring principle that guided all of our societies until only a relatively short time ago. And it's still with us today. I mean, we can't escape it. There's some examples that you could give of the Odinic-Tyrrhic dynamic, but without launching into a big tirade about that. Yeah, I just thought it was worth clarifying that, like, these things are not exactly opposites, but nor are they kind of like co-equals or whatever. So it's a little bit of a different framework than something like left-right or whatever.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, when you're like, this would freak out the trads or whatever, the way that I think about it is, you know, when I walk into like a beautiful forest, I'm like, wow, this forest is like, you know, this is great. In order for this forest to be here, there was at one time like a big ass fire. You know what I mean? A big ass fire burnt this whole shit down at one point sometime and allowed this forest to grow and become beautiful. And it's like, do I love the fire? Would I have liked to be there during the fire?
Exactly.
Hell no. You know what I mean? You know, but you know, I appreciate that it happened, and I appreciate that I'm now here in this beautiful forest to experience the order of it. You know what I mean? So that's kind of the way that I look at it. You know what I mean? And since I've started, because I read your articles when they came out, and I you know, I'm familiar with the Dumézil theory, and you know, so I started to think out over time, like, where else this applies. So this applies to like everything. You know, it really does. You think music, for example, how many times were there like a band or a handful of bands that came in and just fucked shit up? You know what I mean? They completely changed. Yeah. They came with a whole new sound. They wrote a couple albums that were kind of raw and all this, and then they just, half of them died, or they like committed suicide, or they overdosed, or they died in a plane crash, or they just like stopped playing music and they just like disappeared. But like the half-life of what they left behind is like still going by other bands that are still good, but are kind of just like playing within the framework that those guys laid down. You know, you look at bands like, you know, Led Zeppelin, for example. They had like, you know, I'm not a big Led Zeppelin fan. I'm actually pretty critical of Led Zeppelin. Or Cream.
Oh, dude, come on.
I know. That's an unpopular take. But right. Yeah, man, Led Zeppelin came in with their sound and everything, and they only had a few albums, and the sound in their album isn't exactly great. They kind of didn't even sound really good live. And they were just like, they were kind of, you know, crazy. You know, John Bonham, the drummer, died from drinking. They were a complete disaster. They got taken up in rock star lifestyle with drugs and girls and all this, and it ruined their careers, and they only put out a few albums. Well, you know, in rock and roll, just like that framework just still exists to this day. In fact, it's like at the death phase of that. And it's the same thing with, like, you look at heavy metal is another thing. You know, you had the first bands coming in to lay the groundwork of what heavy metal is, right? Let's talk about your Slayers, talk about your King Diamonds, your Merciful Fates. You know, you can go back like bands like Possessed. You know, we could talk about who laid the groundwork. But they came in and they did this Odinic force, and they laid the groundwork. And, you know, for years and years and years, we had so many great metal bands. But now it's like towards the end of the phase, and like a lot of the stuff sucks. And I mean, there's good underground stuff. But as far as in the mainstream of things, I don't mean mainstream as in by the record companies necessarily, but in the mainstream, stuff has like gotten really fucking gay and not cool and not based and not metal. Yeah. So it's like, it's about time for another Odinic band or set of bands to come in and burn the shit down again.
And this is not to say that the Tyrrhic is like when everything sucks and it's deteriorating or whatever.
No.
The Tyrrhic is vital, and it has like a aliveness, and it really it's what most of history is comprised of. But yeah, you're right. It's interesting that I haven't actually thought about this in terms of music, but I probably should. Comes to mind something like the Sex Pistols would be a good Odinic kind of band in a way. They actually were a little bit late, but they were, this crazy band with a guy who like killed himself after killing his girlfriend. They were a band for like 13 or 14 months. They put out one album and they absolutely fucking burned everything to the ground and changed everything. The Ramones came before them, of course. Probably a more properly Odinic, punk band would be something like the Stooges or like Velvet Underground. But in any case, you get these like bands that only did a few albums and flamed out really fucking hard. And then, in the punk, vein, you might think of something like Minor Threat as like a very Tyrrhic band, where this is like a hardcore punk band that was really great and awesome and everything, but like was very straight laced and very almost formulaic. Like a lot of their songs sound exactly the fucking same. What they do is very, very good, but it's very, very like exoteric and formulaic and not that weird at all. It follows the formula. It's very Tyrrhic thing, but it's still vital. It's not like when punk got shitty in the 90s or whatever. Sorry, Green Day fans, but and Nirvana, there's another Odinic kind of band, right? Like, again, they're not the first necessarily, but they were the ones that basically, they're like the founder, right? They're the ones that came in and like just absolutely obliterated all the shit that was going on at the time, started a new paradigm, and there was a lot of good bands that followed in their wake that like were kind of like, following a similar path, and then it got really shitty, and it's just like continued to get really horrible. The legacy of grunge is very sad, even though it's a great genre. But so I agree with that. But yeah, and it makes it sound like that the Odinic is doing all the cool stuff, all the interesting stuff, and that the Tyrrhic is just kind of like just going through the motions and everything, and that's not really what it's about, right? But it can kind of seem that way, because when we study history, we're mostly studying the Odinic, right? Like if you read a history book, or if you take a course or watch a documentary, you're probably going to hear about revolutions. You're probably going to hear about war and famines and disease and environmental disasters and collapse. You're going to hear about the turning points in history, right?
Yeah, you're going to hear about Julius Caesar, and not necessarily like Marcus Aurelius and the five noble kings or whatever.
Yeah, and I mean, of course you are, but like that makes sense. That's what history is about, at least like reading history. But these turning points in history are, they're when the Odinic man steps onto the stage, but they're relatively short, right? You get a collapse or a revolution. Let's call it extraordinary time. The Odinic man steps onto the scene. He sets the social order on a new foundation. Maybe he was even the one that pushed it over. And then you get a long period of stability. Let's just call that normal time. And in history, what we study is usually the history of extraordinary time. But the history that we live is usually the history of normal time. Lenin he had a really good quote. He said, there are decades when nothing happens, and there are weeks when decades happen, right? And the decades where nothing happens, this is like normal time. This is when the Tyrrhic prevails. And the weeks when decades happen is extraordinary time. That's when the Odinic man steps onto the scene. And it's the job of the Tyrrhic basically to enshrine and preserve the last Odinic. And I think this explains a lot, actually, about how different people react to kind of like different things. So I have this term that I think needs to be used more often, because it kind of carves reality at the joints pretty well. It's called the trad left. And this is basically like liberalism's way of regulating itself. We could talk about the trad left, but basically what it is it's cuckservatism. This is like like I say, it's liberalism's way of holding itself together. First, you get the revolution. Then a generation later, you get people saying, well, actually, this revolution, this is our tradition. And then you get like, liberals like Rousseau and like at the outset of liberalism and Locke and guys say when they tried to say like we was always free individuals, like a social contract back in the primitive days or whatever. Total retconning bullshit. But like this is them basically being this, like fulfilling this Tyrrhic role. And this is when Jordan Peterson and the whole like intellectual dark web, that's what they're doing. They're basically saying, the civil rights revolution of the 60s was a good thing, and this is our tradition, and we need to fight for it against the evil Marxists who are emboldening the radical right. And what they mean by this is that it's their job to hold back the Odinic destroyer creator. They're the latest Tyrrhic. So the Tyrrhic loves the last Odinic and hates the one that's kind of like looming on the horizon. But I mean, eventually the social order deteriorates. No matter what your ordering principle is, entropy is going to break it down, right? And occasionally the Odinic does rear its head, and it's inevitable. And then you have this like hell on earth kind of like time when almost nobody would want to be alive. But it's also a time of great opportunity too, right? Like there's truth in the old Chinese proverb that the great man is a public misfortune. And the Odinic is, he's sovereign, but he's not a nice guy. You don't really want to run across the great man, right? He's there to raise everything to the ground and make a fresh start. He's the founder. The Odinic principle is the dark, rare, awesome, disorderly principle. It's not something that you want, but it's something that you need. It's like a painful like dose of medicine that goes down as hard as any medicine could ever go down. And then the cycle starts all over again. So, but yeah, the Tyrrhic is definitely like, I mean, this is what most of us live through, and it's what most of us want to live through because people don't want to live through revolutions, dude. Come on, like let's be honest, right?
Yeah,
most people don't, because most people are not set up for that, nor should they be, right?
And also, I think a lot of people that say they do really wouldn't if they had to live through it. You know what I mean? Like these guys are like, y'all fucking. It's like, do you know what a civil war is going to be like? It's like. It's not going to be like, side A versus side B, and side A is going to go to Mount Doom and face Sauron and win. And it's not going to be, it's like fucking chaos where people like shoot their bosses that piss them off. They steal from their neighbors. Like, it's like bad. It's like, it's terrible. But, and one more example I wanted to give in Odinic and Tyrrhic framework in things that aren't political or societal. In art, the moment I said Odinic, I looked over and I saw my Robert E. Howard poetry book. I looked at Robert E. Howard is like in literature would be an Odinic figure. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah.
He lived to be 30. What they say, the flame that burns brightest, whatever. That was him. You know what I mean? He came onto the scene. He was prolific. He was eccentric. He was passionate. He was kind of out of control. He was weird, and he lived this kind of crazy life in solitude. You know what I mean? And then and he left behind a legacy that could never be forgotten. But that doesn't mean that the guys that came after him were no good. You guys out there that are sword and sorcery readers, guys like Lieber and DeCamp and the guys that like literally wrote in the sword and sorcery tradition, those guys were dope. In fact, some people would argue that they perfected Howard's style. Like they perfected it but they followed within the framework and they normalized it. And thanks to those guys, that style became as popular as it is today. But when I actually opened the book, when I looked at it, it immediately opened on this one very short poem that is kind of relevant. It was a little spooky. You mind if I read it real quick?
Go for it.
This is by Robert E. Howard. It's called The Wheel of Destiny. It says, the day of man's set doom is come. The altars break, the idols fall. The shattered oracles are dumb, and utter stillness ruleth all. Across the great world's silent girth, the grass-grown cities rot and rust. Still are the rulers of the earth. Men in their worth sink back to dust. Man fades without a trace to tell, where seas roar on the primal plain. the mindless living single cell begins the long, slow climb again. And
yeah, I mean, it's like that just completely encapsulates the idea of the cycle, right? It's that cyclical history. That is the Odinic, that's the turn, right? That's where the Odinic has come to burn everything to the ground and make a fresh start. Unfortunately, it just seems like that's what we have to endure, or just, somehow this is how it goes. But at the same time, it's cleansing, right? Like it's required. Like you mentioned about like the forest burning down. After a while, the forest becomes really overgrown and choked with vegetation, and just like a tinderbox ready to go up. And all of the old growth is established, and biodiversity kind of suffers, and it's very hard for like new life and new plants and everything to kind of get started and everything. And it's very unstable, and eventually a spark is going to light the whole thing up, and it's going to go down in flames. And any social order worth its salt that's been around for any time has a kind of contingency plan, right? So that it can survive this turning, just like a forest can. Like, the trees are evolved basically to survive this inevitable forest fire, and in fact they kind of need it in a way. So yeah, this is kind of what's being described in that poem, and it's something that's necessary and cleansing and good. And we have a thing in our circles where we kind of love the Odinic, right? Like I think for the most part you can kind of break it down to like people who are pagans, people who are atheists, people who are just like rabid nationalists, and especially like ethno-nationalists, tend to like the Odinic, even if they don't think about it in that term. Whereas I think more like Christians tend to be more, they like the Tyrrhic side of things. But for the most part, I think the dominant sentiment in our circles is that the Odinic is really based. And that the trad side of things is kind of like, those people again. Like I get a little bit of this from the TRS crowd. They really don't like conservatives. I understand that. I'm on the same page with you guys. Believe me. They don't really like reactionaries. They don't like traditionalists. It's part of being a National Socialist, of course. These guys really like what we would call the Odinic, even though that's not a term they use. And in our circles, like more broadly, we kind of have a tendency to say the Odinic is based, and that's because we're in the radical right, But the Odinic is not based. Sometimes the Odinic is shit. Sometimes it's terrible. Sometimes it's something you just genuinely don't want, not just for yourself, but for your whole folk, right? Like FDR was an Odinic figure. Abraham Lincoln was an Odinic figure. Tony Blair is an Odinic figure. None of these guys are good, right? The Odinic is only good if what it replaces is bad, which, obviously it is now, but also if what it puts in its place is better. And it isn't always like that, right? So it is dangerous. There's a risk involved in the revolution. The revolution could bring a restoration of something great, or it could bring much, much worse shit, right? So there is that risk. And I find that a lot of the talk about, like, there's a term that gets used a lot on the Twitter sphere called the longhouse. And what this is kind of getting at is, like, I understand 100% like what people who use that don't like. They just basically don't like the matriarchy, like gynocracy, sort of like ruled by like hectoring, like, mother hen kind of social order. Nobody wants that. That's not a good thing, right? But there is a kind of like overcompensation to focus on that only the Odinic is great, and the Tyrrhic is sort of disparaged and everything like that. There's a bit of a tragedy there, right? Because We can't all be great men.
They're going to be one great man.
Yeah. I mean, most of us are going to have to be followers. Most of us are going to have to be that guy's deputies, right? I don't think that there's anybody in our scene right now, any thought leader in our scene who is worth his salt that would not bend the knee to the great man, right? That nobody who considers himself that, right? Because it's just like that guy comes around only, once in a few generations sort of thing. But there is a bit of a sentiment where it's kind of like, like traditionalism is kind of for fags, and like what we really need is everyone to just be a revolutionary. It's like, that doesn't really work. You know what I mean? I don't know. Hopefully this makes sense what I'm saying here.
No, you're saying that first, like you said before, most people are built for the Tyrrhic. I'll fully admit to you, I'm built for the Tyrrhic. I like the Tyrrhic. I don't want to be around when everything's all jacked up. I want to, I like having like an easy life. Like everybody sees my posts about how space is gay and sucks.
Yeah, those were very Tyrrhic posts. I thought about that when I read them.
Am I wrong though?
No, that's the thing. What you're expressing there when you're saying space is gay and we shouldn't like explore because it's like it's a void and like what the fuck are you thinking? Basically what the sentiment that's being expressed there is oikophilia, or love of home, or love of the familiar. Frankly, dude, it's the same fucking thing that animates the entirety of Homer's Odyssey. This is what Odysseus is trying to do. Odysseus would have understood that space is gay and that Faustianism is not something like an unalloyed good, right? He's not trying to go on adventures. He's not trying to conquer horizons or anything. He's trying to get the fuck home. He wants to go to his hearth. He wants to sacrifice to the ancestors. He wants to fuck his wife. He wants to, when he gets back, he wants to kill all the suitors. He wants to be a normal dude. He wants to see his son. He wants to have a life. He wants to be a dad. He wants to like be a normal fucking dude. He's a war veteran. He wants to get back, right? That's the Tyrrhic right there. And if you don't think the Tyrrhic can be heroic, well, just read fucking Homer's Odyssey. There's your Tyrrhic for you. And there's, while we're on this topic, there's a bit of a kind of over lionization of the Faustian in our circles as well. Yeah. And this kind of ties into like that. And Whityard had an excellent interview with Millennial Woes on Millennial this year, where he basically talked about the downside of the Faustian. Now, I sort of look at the Faustian in a slightly different angle because I look at it through the Odinic Tyrrhic framework, which I think is clear enough by this point. I think that, the Odinic Tyrrhic paradigm, it's a higher resolution version of the Faustian, right? The reason why is that the Odinic Tyrrhic, roughly, we could say roughly like Faustian and Trad, for the moment, they're not in tension, but they're complementary, right? We've already gone over that. They're literally co-sovereigns in the Dumézilian framework. The Odinic blazes the trail, and the Tyrrhic basically stamps it with the legitimacy of tradition. One result of this is that we, as a people, at times we have the spirit of Odin, and at the other times we have like the spirit of Tyr. The idea that we are as peoples, as let's just say Northwestern Europeans, always Faustian is too simplistic. It's kind of brain dead. It's not who we are all the time. It's part of who we are. And like the civilizational winter is the season where we're at now, basically, is like where the Tyrrhic kind of hunkers down to hibernate as a survival mechanism. This is what that guy, what's his name, Rod Dreher, this insufferable fucking calls the Benedict option. And he's actually not really wrong about that. In some sense, we kind of need that. We kind of need people who are going to create their own, their own enclaves. It's like basically the Amish strategy, right? We need people who are going to do that, like for our shit. But in the late winter, when the point in the cycle we're at right now kind of comes to a close, the Odinic figure comes to inaugurate the new spring. Of course, we in the radical right, we're more Odinic. Our job is to lay the ideological, institutional, the moral groundwork for the return of the Odinic man. But at the same time, we have like more trad orientation, like people who have a more trad orientation. We need them building communities to weather the storm too. Both of these approaches are like legitimately Aryan because our biospirit encompasses both of these theological archetypes. And the key insight of the framework, as I've said already, is that the two are not at odds, but like complementary. And what Faustianism is, this is where I'm going with this. What Faustianism is, it's not the Odinic, which you might be tempted to think at first. What Faustianism is it's the Odinic that's grotesquely unconstrained by any Tyrrhic at all. It's a monstrosity. And this is why our civilization, if you want to call it Faustian, is characterized by a devil worshiper, by Faust, right? Like Faust is not an admirable character at all. He's kind of a pathetic character that like kind of gets in over his head and has to get his ass pulled out by God, right? That's the story. And this is not
Prometheus, dude. Everyone, like people guys say like, this is Prometheus, hail Prometheus. This is, Western man is very Promethean. It's like, dude, Prometheus, like read the fucking story, dude.
What happens to that guy?
What
Tell me that.
He gets he gets chained to a rock and gets his guts ripped out by birds every single day until the end of time. Like he's like the worst possible fate ever for defying the gods and like being too much of a Faustian jerk off. Dude,
I don't know.
Listen to the rules.
Exactly. Exactly. It's like it's Hesiod part of the fucking Longhouse or something. I don't know. I'm just breaking these people's balls over the Longhouse thing. I get it. I totally get it.
I say Longhouse. I like the concept.
Yeah, no, I like it too. I just find it gets kind of like overused for like anything that's like remotely normal or whatever. Anyway, but this like, the idea that like Faust is a devil worshiper, I don't think that this is just Christians like, kvetching about our Germanic sort of like roots or whatever. It's the fact that the Faustian is something genuinely pathological, whereas the Odinic, that's something different. That is part of a whole. That's something good. But on its own, left to run off the rails and just completely like, grow like a cancer until it consumes everything, it's something that is not at all good. So yeah, the Faustian spirit, Faustianism conquering horizons, it needs to be tempered. It needs to be tempered by the counterbalancing principle. And if it's not, then it becomes something ugly. And that's what Faustianism is. So, I mean, I know like, when guys use the word Faustianism, they roughly kind of tend to mean something like the Odinic. But I think looked at through this archetype or this dichotomy, we can understand Faustianism in a kind of more high resolution way. We can understand it more nuanced way and understand what's wrong with it and why it led to where we are now. Basically, the problem that we have today isn't just that there's no Odinic man to like hit the reset button. It's because our Tyrrhic principle as peoples, as Europeans, has been completely obliterated. And all that we have now is basically the yearning to transgress, to transcend and to transgress boundaries, right? Like that's basically what the Odinic is. And when it's just left to sort of like go off by itself, it becomes something that's pathological. So I think that's important to understand.
Yeah. Yeah. And, something came to my mind in study of like the Germanic holidays. You have like three main bloats, right? You have Midsummer, you have like the Harvest Festival. I don't want to go too far because just in case people aren't familiar with what I'm talking about. You have like a spring and you have a fall and you have Yule. You have like Christmas time. Well, this is kind of, these three holidays are attributed to three different patriarchal deities. The first one is Odin. The second one is Ingvifreyr. And the third one is Thor, right? And Odin, even though Odin is referred to as the Yule father and Santa is based off of Odin and Odin is all mixed up with Yule time, his holiday is spring. So when you said that the Odinic comes in and creates the spring, there's this kind of confusion among heathen scholars as to why spring is the Odinic holiday.
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of like made this connection here that is not self-evident in the sources or in the archaeology. So that's pretty cool.
Odin inaugurates the new start, right? Like he begins the cycle again, at least in this sense, right? Like I'm not saying necessarily in the Germanic lore or whatever, but as an archetype, as a principle, as a kind of, the one half of this dichotomy, that makes a lot of sense. He is kind of the beginning. He's a liminal figure that sort of like in almost like Janus-like fashion sort of marks the end of the old and the beginning of the new sort of thing. So that makes a lot of sense to me.
And I'm also one I'm very critical of the Faustianism thing. When we talk about Faustianism, I think of transhumanism. I think of like technological society. I think of companies dumping waste into rivers with no thought of it. I think of all of the horrors that we've created, not thinking about, like jumping without thinking first. And maybe it's because I have a very Tyrrhic worldview or whatever. But to me, Faustianism is evil. Like I don't know who first said, let's be Faustian. That's not a good story. Let's be Promethean. That's not a good story. The guys in these
it's
stories,
a tragedy.
These are tragedies. What happens? So why would we want to hop on ship with some fucking guys that get themselves killed and damned and destroyed and fucking have their guts ripped out? And this is a terrible idea. You know what I mean? In my view. So I like your framework better, where it's like this kind of controlled thing. And speaking of the the Germanic lore, the first thing that comes to my mind in uncontrolled Odinic force is the story of Vali, where Odin has to, in order to get revenge for the death of his son Balder, he goes to the Norns, and the Norns say you must have a child by the giantess Rinda, right? So he goes and he uses Sather magic, which is black magic, to trick her, and he rapes her. You know what I mean? He's so Odinic. He's off the rails, unconstrained here, that he uses black magic, rapes this lady to fulfill this prophecy, and it comes to fruition. And his son Vali is born, etc., gets revenge. However, Odin then gets brought to the court of the gods and gets punished. He gets banished from heaven, gets banished from Asgard, right? So he has to he gets brought back. So even Odin himself cannot escape his fate. The pressures of fate are regardless of how powerful you think you are or whatever, you will face your fate. And this is this story came to mind talking about this.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, there is that. I mean, it kind of explains something about us. The fact that, well, I mean, so basically, I think one of the things you can do with this framework is that you can look at different European peoples and get a sense of who they are. To kind of give you the punchline up front, we as Germanic peoples are the most Odinic out of any of the Indo-European peoples, right? And this is kind of colored who we are. It's kind of like, once you understand this about us, you understand a lot more shit, if you really think about it. And when you talk about Odin, basically being this transgressive figure that even transgresses the laws of the gods and incurs the wrath of fate because of this heinous act and other things that he's done. I mean, this kind of in some ways tells you something about us, because we are that is we have that archetype more than any other of the Indo-European peoples. So I mean, the Germanics being the most Odinic people out of all, were very serious and melancholic. I mean, so are the Russians, but they get it, I think, from the Varangians, who are a Germanic people. We're revolutionary. We are, Faustian, if you want to call it that. We're extreme. We're religiously fundamentalist. We're generally kind of quiet people for the most part. But if you push us far enough, you will find just a fucking tiger, right? Like we're explosive. We're generally like, not flying off the handle very easily. Like you think of like the character of like, your typical Norwegian or like Scandinavian. This is not somebody who's like, it's not like an Italian, right?
Mm-hmm.
Very, very different kind of temperament. But if you push these people too far, you'll never find a scarier person than a Germanic person if you push them. It's why we were berserkers, right? We're also intensely creative. We make great leaders and statesmen. We're immanentist and pragmatic, right? So the Germanics are basically like a volcano that kind of belches out these great men. And we, if we're being honest, we kind of suck at being trad. Look at our religious figures, like, Northwestern Europeans. Even our religious figures are Odinic, even though like, priestly types are generally more Tyrrhic. Look at like Martin Luther. Look at John Calvin. Look at Meister Eckhart. These are not trad figures, but they're like our religious guys, right? And our great men are absolutely terrifying. You think of like a Hitler or a Cromwell or a Napoleon or something like that. I guess Napoleon was he was Corsican, but sort of spiritually Germanic more so, I think. And this kind of explains a little bit about us, right? Like, why are we so revolutionary and progressive? Well, it's because we're Odinic. This is our blessing and our curse. And this is what I was kind of getting at. The Odinic steamrolls over boundaries. This is the root of Faustianism. This is what people, in the sort of like Bronze Age pervert sphere like. They really like this, like, transgressing boundaries. They like the idea that we as Germanics especially, we will like just bulldoze through geographical borders and intellectual boundaries. But unfortunately, we also do the same thing with moral boundaries. And unfortunately, this was what makes us prone to all kinds of gay bullshit as a result. Like, just look in the mirror and like, let's be honest with ourselves. The two are not separable. You can't just be all about like, transgressing boundaries and hope to not be about transgressing moral boundaries. It doesn't work, right? And which is why the counterbalancing Tyrrhic principle is so important for us as, peoples, as a folk, specifically within the European context. We need the Tyrrhic. We need this shit like we need fucking air, right? But we kind of lost that at some point in our history, as almost all European peoples have done. It's a bit of another story, but like we've all kind of like lost our religious sensibility, but it's hurt us the most because we need that. That's our thing. We need that social structure because we don't have it in our blood. We are not moderate peoples. We don't have as much Tyrrhic as say someone from Greece or someone from Iran or whatever. We need that shit, and the fact that we don't have it is like, it's been a disaster for us in a way that it hasn't been for like Italians or Indians or other Indo-European peoples. So this is a way, like, if you understand this framework and you really grasp it and apply it, it can tell you things about, the different European peoples or just about peoples in general, that are useful and I think are much better and higher resolution explanations of like how we got to be where we are than just like, oh, we forgot to be traditionalist or we forgot to whatever, I think there's some pretty low quality explanations for like why we are where we are today floating around. And I think this is something that makes a bit more sense to me anyway.
I think about this quite a bit. I feel that like our natural, we have this kind of meme that like, I think it's based on a lot of like romantic look at like the 50s and like that era, and that we're these straight-laced, well-behaved, moderate people that, if left to our own devices, will behave ourselves and follow laws and like all that. And I think maybe some of that's true, but it's like I that's not my experience. You know what I mean? Like
no,
growing
we are not at all moderate. We are extreme. English and Germanic people, sort of cut you off there, Dave. And Americans, we are fucking extremists. That's why we are cutting our dicks off. That's why we are the ones inviting the world into our countries. This is not a moderate position. This is the most fucking liberalism is the most extreme ideology in the history of the world. This is why we have it, right? It's because we're these fucking extremists. It's like we're not straight-laced at all. I like this comes from a kind of like a backwards looking view of like Victorian society or something like that. But, you know, I don't know.
But even then,
sense to me.
Those people weren't well behaved. Like they listen to the Christmas carols, right? We wish you a Merry Christmas. We wish you a Merry. What is it? In the one part they go, now bring us some figgy pudding. Now, what you know what they're
you can hear them like stomping on the fucking on the fucking floor, right?
What they're talking about with bring us some figgy pudding is that these guys were a bunch of drunk hooligans out at Christmas time singing Christmas carols, and what they're saying is bring us some fucking treats or we're gonna trash your house because we're a bunch of fucking drunk maniacs.
We won't go until we get some.
We won't go until we get some, so bring it right here, bitch. We're fucking getting rowdy. And this is like, you know, I can't tell you, and you know, this is something that burns in my mind, and this is just like the behavior of like young white men versus young black men. Is I always thought like it was weird that like, because there's like the thing that like, you know, blacks are the way that they are, et cetera, et cetera. But when they get around us, they're like, you guys don't act right. I can't be around you guys. You guys are fucking too much. This is too crazy for me. They do. And it's like, it's not just in our, like how we are. It's like, we just like do bad shit for the sake of bad. You guys listening, when you guys were young men, when you and your boys started drinking, especially the brown liquor, what happened? You went out and did some bad kid shit just for the sake of it, just because you're a fucking rowdy maniac, just because you're a hooligan. In your heart, in your soul, you are a hooligan. And the one thing that like sticks in my mind is I remember there's this I remember looking on Facebook a while back, and I was like, you know, 23 or something. I'm looking at my friends' pictures of when they have these like house parties and they're like fucking around and stuff. And I literally like picture after picture. I like the first picture was one of my buddies. This is rowdy young guy stuff, but he's like sitting on this toilet, and he's sitting on this toilet. He's got no clothes on. He's got his pecker tucked in like under the toilet seat, so it looks like he's got no dick. Yeah. And he's like got this weird look on his face, and like all his boys are standing around laughing, hooting and hollering, pointing at him. And there's this like black dude like peering over the crowd with this like horror on his face. And there's this other one, and there's these two guys, and they're wearing like they're like in their underpants, but they're like wearing like ladies garments, like they have like bras on and stuff, and they're fist fighting, and they're like bleeding from the face, and they're like all drunk, bloody, wearing these like complete fucking nutty stuff. And there's a black dude sitting in the back, like with his legs like tight together, like holding his hands, like this is like he's like really uncomfortable.
He's like, these white niggas is buck wild, right? Like,
y'all don't act right, nigga. Y'all crazy as hell. Like, fuck wrong with you, boy?
Like,
yeah, exactly.
That was like, you know, that's just like what comes to my mind. That's white boy shit. It's to act wild. You know what I mean? And it's just like the way that we are.
Interesting. It's interesting that you mention it in the context of like blacks, because you know, it's kind of, doesn't it seem weird that like Europeans and Africans are like, could not be more different, like phenotypically and in a lot of ways, but yet white people fucking love rap. Why is that? Why do you think that is? Well, it's because, I mean, I think the proximal sort of explanation is that blacks and Europeans are similar enough in one way that they kind of see eye to eye. We're not the same, but we do have this in common, is that we're both fucking savages at heart. Like we are, like just in our like ancestral sort of like how we came up as basically like tribal savages. this is something that we share, right? And we like that. We like that about hip hop. We like that about rap, is that it's very masculine. It's got this sort of unhinged quality to it. It's got this dangerous quality to it. Like, just like the whole like ethnic and cultural background of being from the hood and like a dangerous place. Have you listened to Academic Agent's recent like thing
Czarface?
Czarface, yeah.
I have not. I missed it.
It's pretty cool, yeah. Hopefully it's still up on YouTube. But anyway, he talks about this, them being from like a very dangerous background and how we can't really relate to that because basically it's a thing for African Americans and it's just what they have or whatever. But there's a deeper sense in which that we do actually kind of like understand each other in a way that like, Chinese people and people from like, I don't know, Mesoamerica may not quite understand see eye to eye on, but there's a reason why whites and blacks both like hip hop and whites grabbed us. It's not just that we're ethnomasochistic or whatever, or that we love the outsider, we love the other. It's that, but it's also because there's something there between us. There's something in common. I think there actually is a way to kind of also understand this in like an even deeper way through the Odinic and Tyrrhic, right? So basically, what you've got is these like two paradigm, or these two categories, these two parts of our folk soul, shall we say. And I think that these actually they have pre-Indo-European origins. Basically, the Odinic is very much more of a hunter-gatherer kind of theological paradigm. And the Tyrrhic is more of a farmer or agriculturalist paradigm. So basically, hunter-gatherers have more of a like shamanic or an animist theological paradigm for the most part. And by shamanic, what I mean is an ecstatic participation in the divine, right? Like there's no such thing as shamanic religion. It's a paradigm within a religion. But the shamanic is participatory, so the shaman will take part in the divine. It's initiatory, so he enters into it, and it's ecstatic. There's a kind of outsideness to it. Speaking of outsideness, there's a kind of standing outside of oneself in the normal order of reality. So the Odinic has these elements, these shamanic elements, I would say. It's participatory in that in Odinic cults, you literally take on the shape of the god. Right, like the Norse wolf cults, the Odin cults would like wear masks to depict themselves as the god or the totemic animal, like the wolf. There was an ancient Baltic tribe. Now the Balts are also a very Odinic people. There's an ancient tribe of theirs called the Nuri that's described by Herodotus, where once a year some of them would become a wolf for a few days and change back to a man. So there's and you could think of the Roman Lupercalia. This is basically a celebration where a brotherhood of feral youths would assemble and like take on the appearance of wolves and run through the city. So basically you become the god, you become the animal. There's a sense in which you participate in the divine. This is an important part of the shamanic religion. It's also initiatory, like Odinic wolf cults were initiatory. Indian society didn't really have this wolf cult, but they did have the mythical Gandharvas that represented the same thing, and it was an initiatory brotherhood as well, just similar to the the Odinic, and it was ecstatic, right? Like the Odinic is speaking of ecstasy, and what we did in the last episode. The intoxicants are involved, right? There's an altered state of consciousness involved in the Odinic. Odin steals the meat of poetry. The Indian Gandharvas steal the soma plant and then gain the power of music to play the ragas, right? So what characterizes the Odinic is fundamentally what characterizes the same thing as shamanic practices. And the Tyrrhic is more of a cultic paradigm. It's more ritualistic and earthbound. It's tied to a place. It's inherited rather than being initiated. It's something you're born into. It's ritualistic, so it's very formulaic. It's very much about blood and soil and following this formula or command-based imperative type religious paradigm. So anyway, what you can kind of see is that the people who are like the peoples within the Indo-Europeans who are the most Odinic. So we're talking about like the Germanics, and especially the Nordics, but we're also talking about maybe the Celts and the Balts as well. These are the peoples who have the most Western hunter-gatherer genetic component in them, right? And the people who are the most Tyrrhic, the most like sedentary or like ancestor cult like, are the people who have the most early European farmer genetic component. We're talking about like the Romans, the Greeks, and especially the Indians, although they don't have earlier European farmer. They have Indus Valley, which is another very urbanized people. So what I'm getting at here is that if what characterizes the Odinic is a kind of like deep prehistory and ancestral history of hunter-gathererness, shall we say, we have that in common with Africans. And so there's a manner in which we can there's a common ground that we have with them that we don't have with every other people, right? So I think that this kind of like explains in a more deep and ancestral way why it is that we can understand each other. We like some of the same music, and whites kind of like blues earlier in the 20th century and black music, and they've always liked black music. And it also kind of explains why we're even too much for them, right? Right? Because like we're those fucking savage tribes that were like genociding each other on a regular basis, and that's even too much for Jamal, right? So there you go.
I can't. There's so many examples in my head that I remember, like the white boys getting too wild. It just come to my. I remember this one time. We're at this. We literally just like threw a party in this like abandoned kind of, it was like sort of a garage thing on this dude's property that was just sort of had drywall and shit in it, but it was like falling apart. And we just like, we went to this dude's house because we were boys with his kids, and we threw a party in this like barn thing, right? And like a ton of people showed up, like a bunch of people, and it was like it was mostly white people, mostly white guys like me that were there, but there was like a couple black dudes, there's like a couple Asian dudes or whatever, and literally like we're like the white dudes are like, we're taking shots, we're getting hype, it's summer, so we got our shirts off, we're sweaty, we're like we're fucking we were getting a little wild. And then one of my boys comes running in, he found this like pole it was like at a flat bottom, it was like to stamp down, to flatten out soil or something, right? It's this big heavy piece of metal. He comes just fucking tearing in and just blasts a hole in the wall with it and just like smashes it. And this was like chum in the water, right? We just went fucking bonkers. So we started like just taking turns, screaming and smashing holes in this fucking wall. All of the colored people left. Like my one dude who's the Asian guy, Cambodian guy, he's like, dude, you guys are this is getting too crazy. He's like, you guys are gonna start like drinking blood or something. I fucking bounce. And then we look around and it's like everybody that's not white is gone, and we just chimped out for the rest of the night. And then we had this big battle in the field, like doing like karate fucking battle royale, and I passed out under a pine tree in my underwear.
Yeah. Don't fuck with these white people, man. Like, have you seen what they do? Have you seen what they do to each other? Have you seen what their wars have looked like, especially like in the last couple hundred years? It's like these people are so fucking insane and wanted to genocide each other so fucking hard that they decided that they would split the fucking atom to figure out how to do that even better, right? So man, like, don't fuck with white people, because they're fucking terrifying. We are terrifying. If I was like of some other race, I would be like, let's not push these people too hard. Like, we've seen what can happen, right? So, yeah, there you go.
So I kind of embrace this, like this side of us. You know what I mean? I don't try to LARP like we're these straight laced, well behaved, choir boys. I'm prone to do some gangster shit. Like I have it in my blood. It's in my instincts, and I don't know why we want to deny that, because that part of our spirit, that part of who we are, that part of our personality, of our folk soul is like it's true. You know what I mean? I find it's very strange when I especially like when I talk to like modern Germans. Now, I'm a Pennsylvania German. I'm descended from Germans that came here centuries ago. And I grew up around people. Most of the people I grew up with, their last name ends in ER. You know what I mean? You're either German or you're Italian, or there's some Irish in there too. But it's like something like 70% of the people I grew up with, that we are wild white boys that, grew up here. You know what I mean? And so when I run into Germans who I'm like, oh, fellow Germans, they're like completely different. They're nothing like what I read in the stories about, the rowdy working class Englishmen or the ancient Germanic tribes or whatever. They cover their mouths when they laugh. They speak in turn. They don't, they're quiet until they're spoken to, and they have this stoicness about them. And this might have something to do with like post World War II programming, but I don't know. It's very strange to me that they've evolved like that.
Yeah, no, it is a little bit strange. I think that's like some of the legacy of, well, I don't know if we can say Puritanism, because that's an English thing, but there is a side to the Germanic peoples that is, it is Faustian, shall we say, or Odinic. It's not something, totally pathological, but it's something that can lead to this, right? And it's the same thing that like the Scandinavians have. A lot of them are very similarly, like they're quiet people. They're not brash, and they're not the kind of people that will like just completely go wild at the drop of a hat, or as soon as the beer and whiskey starts flowing. There is a sense, though, in which it does make sense from within this framework, because what the Odinic is about fundamentally is it's about transgressing boundaries. It's about going further and higher and everything like that. And this is something that I've talked about. I think I've talked about it in a previous Culture Dads episode, but I wrote a Substack article about it, is that once you've conquered all the boundaries that there are to conquer, you start colonizing yourself. You start conquering yourself. And it's this inward turn. This can actually be kind of damaging to a people if it goes too far. And this is kind of like, in a sense, what's been happening to us as Europeans as a whole for centuries now. But once this will to power, this like will to conquer the world sort of like runs out of space, you sort of have to conquer your own self. Like you have to conquer, like it's almost like sort of conquering your own spirit sort of thing. And you become very ascetic, and it's almost like it is a kind of sickly thing. And unfortunately it's an artifact of the point in the cycle that we're at now, the winter stage, right? This is kind of what happens. But I wouldn't write off these Germans forever. I could certainly see once, if a few dominoes fall in the right order and Europe basically decouples from America geostrategically, and you see Germany reassert itself as basically the leader of Europe, which it probably naturally should be, you're going to see a very different German evolve pretty quickly over just a few generations. One that's a little bit more certain, still buttoned down maybe, but and maybe not like just like balls out sort of like, berserker or anything like that. But somebody that looks much more like a, shall we say, mid 20th century German, in that he is very assured of his place in the world and his destiny and his right to rule and things like that. I think that this is in us. This is in us as people because of our Odinic side to us. And but yeah, it's interesting how it manifests differently in different peoples. Americans are just kind of Americans are a bit more brash. This is just, it's part of what the American psyche is all about. It's like everybody who is an American notices this, and it's not a bad thing. I don't think it's a bad thing. A lot of people sort of like counter signal it, like gaily counter signal, and just be like, oh, the ugly American or whatever. This is something great, actually. So something I respect about Americans is the fact that they've got some fucking balls. But like it's a little bit different for some of the other Germanic peoples, and I think that this is part of just where they're at in their own historical cycles.
So you think that this rowdiness that I'm describing is more of an American trait than it is like a Germanic trait?
Well, it is now. I think it's a Germanic trait that's like latent, and it's also an English thing, right? Like, look at like the hooliganism in England. Look at like, okay, like look at any English like movie that's not a historical drama. Listen to how they talk. It's really vulgar. It's really fucking vulgar, especially since about 2000. I noticed this. I noticed when somehow like British culture changed. I don't think it's just the negrification of it. It's like, it's also just like the native culture is becoming more vulgar, and like a lot of swearing and a lot of like vernacular, and not the dialogue isn't as manicured and well sort of groomed or whatever. English people are starting to get this. They're starting to get there, right? I think they're starting to reassert their own Odinism, or whatever you want to call it, the berserker sort of like, they're starting to revert to type, which is kind of good. It's encouraging. So you see it there too. It's absent in Canada for the most part. You see it in Australia. This is a perfect example. Holy fuck. Have you seen, I don't know if you saw on Twitter, I reposted this like hilarious video of a guy that's like, he just made up this like minute-long video of like, die in the life of a true Aussie cunt. And it's just like, it's like the fucking bogan culture. It's like the redneck culture of Australia is very fucking strong. These people have the Odinic in them very, very strong. And it's cool. I like it. You know what I mean? I can respect that. So it depends where you go. The Americans don't have a monopoly on it, but certainly not all Germanic peoples are manifesting it at the moment.
So that's the thing that people say, that they think Americans are too brash.
Yeah, well, I don't know. That's how the fucking leader acts. That's what it is to kind of be in charge. I mean, for the most part, anyway. It's like it's something that Americans have kind of earned. It's not necessarily how Americans have always been. I mean, they're certainly at the height of, let's just say, Pax Americana, Americans actually did act with a lot more class. And it's the same thing with the height of the British Empire. Like the British acted with a bit more class. But it's also, it's something that, when you're on top, when you're sort of the top dog or whatever, the sovereign, you can kind of get away with that. Right? You're the center of culture. You're the center of everything. You can kind of assert yourself. So it seems to be like it's either, if you're way out on the fringes, you can kind of afford that. Or if you're somewhere kind of near the center, you can, I mean, if you're on the fringes, you can get away with it. If you're at the center, you can kind of afford it or whatever. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, I don't think it's like explainable on the basis of one single principle. But yeah, it's kind of mysterious how some people who are all descended from, basically the same stock a couple thousand years ago have turned out so differently. It is a bit of a mystery. There's a bit of a mystery to it for sure.
Yeah, there's also this criticism that Americans are sensitive against criticism, and it's true. I get mad when I see. I'm not like, I'll be the first one to come up and talk about globo homo and talk about to completely tear apart my country's culture and like everything, the consumerism. I will rip it to shreds. But the moment that I start hearing somebody like say these blanket things about Americans, I get butthurt about it. I get pissed. You know what I mean? And I don't see why this is a bad thing. You know what I mean? Like, why is it that the fact that we stand up for ourselves, we get pissed when people talk shit? Why is that a bad thing? That's like talk shit, get hit. Fuck you. Don't talk about us like that. Keep that inside your mouth, bud. So I don't understand why it's a bad thing. And I think other guys should have this same thing. It hurts me when I see like other like people dunking on the French or dunking on the Canadians or dunking on the Germans or dunking on these guys. Why is it those guys don't pull up and be like, yo, shut the fuck up, jerk off? You know,
Yeah.
where is that? Stand up for
It's
yourself.
weird. It's really fucking weird, especially as a Canadian, you know. I don't understand why we're not more like that. Why we're not more proud of our heritage and willing to fight for it. And, you know, we're almost our worst critics, right? Like we're just self-disparaging. I don't know. Americans don't strike me as overly sensitive. I mean, they just get a lot of criticism. Like America comes in for critique very often. So
Yeah.
yeah, well, of course they're gonna defend themselves. I don't really understand, to be honest.
I don't know. I think part of it is just like this the postmodernist like irony, and it's the same thing with like comedy too, right? There's this whole thing that everything should be up to be made fun of, and if you have a problem with it, well, then you're too sensitive. What, you can't take a joke, blah 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 blah. And it's just there's certain in my view, there's certain things that are sacred, that you don't joke about, that aren't funny. And if you mock it, you should get punched in the mouth. And yeah. I have that view with everything. You know, don't talk about my ancestors a certain way. You know what I mean? If I hear somebody like, if I hear like an Asian guy or something talking bad about Germans, I'm like, yo, I'm German. Shut the fuck up. You know what I mean? You don't talk like that. And I don't understand why other people, I think part of it, yeah, is a postmodern thing that everything is a joke. And if you have a problem, if you have this instinct to protect what is sacred, that means that you're a bitch, or that means that like you're against the critique culture. Critique culture is so pervasive and toxic and corrosive that it is like bled into people's souls. You know what I mean? And also, people have been, I think it. These other people, like Canadians, for example, have been beaten down for so long and taught that their identity doesn't mean anything, that their identity is they shouldn't be proud of it, that even like people that are nationalist leaning are like, yeah, okay, we're gay. Yeah, okay, we suck. And it's just, I just think that's fucking dumb. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and there is a historical mystery that I don't know why this is, but some of the hardest ass motherfuckers in one era end up being the softest in another era. I don't know why this is. Like, you could think about something like, I mean, Canadians, like, we were frontiersmen living in a very, very harsh environment. And this was no easy task to survive there, right? Look at us now. Look at the Scandinavians, right? Like, again, very similar to the Canadians in that sense. We actually have a lot in common, Canadians and Scandinavians, culturally, in terms of who we are as like our folk soul. You could think of something like the Scottish clanspeople, or like the Lowland clansmen, which were just like absolute fucking savages. Very, very warlike people, very bellicose people that were just constantly fighting the British and fighting each other and killing each other, and blood feuds and weregild and all that, like all day long for centuries and centuries and centuries. And now, what's Scotland look like today? Well, ask Millennial Woes. He'll tell you. It's not the kind of place that you want to. I mean, they've recently. We're looking at passing legislation to forbid people from like saying hate speech in the privacy of their own home, right? Wow. So this is like, yeah, these people have fallen really far. They're not the only ones. The British in general, Canadians, not so much Aussies, not so much Americans, but some of the hardest ass guys have just like completely fallen and just, you know, turn it the exact opposite of what they once were. It's a mystery. I mean, if anybody knows why this is happening, please call the office. Why that happens specifically to the hardest people, it's a bit of a mystery. But anyway, yeah, it's the extremity. I think that like part of the explanation has to be that it's those extremes that it characterize us as Odinic peoples. You see it the same in the Irish. The Celts, you know, insular Celts are very Odinic people in their own way. You could talk about the Balts. Like, these are people who, although they have very homogeneous societies, they are, you know, a lot like the Germans that you've described, right? In terms of being very self-deprecating and sort of shy and all that now. very different in the 1500s, right? Very different peoples. You could think of the Lithuanian Empire or whatever, but yeah. So I mean, this is part of it. It's just that we sort of swing from one extreme to another, to another, to another, and that's who we are. I mean, someone like Mediterranean peoples sort of tend to be a little bit more stable and on an even keel, and this is part of their Tyrism, I suppose.
Mediterraneans are interesting because they do have this innate like order to their to how they socialize, right? There are certain things you don't say, there's certain things you don't do, there's certain things like they doesn't matter anywhere in time, they have borders that they don't cross. However, within these borders, they are more in your face than say like your Germanic person.
They'll fuck you up like if you talk shit about the saint that they worship or whatever. But they'll they're very more ordered people. Like we're talking about the Germanics, right, as being Faustian or Odinic. Like the Romans in their obviously the ancestral people of the Italians were in some sense like the foil to the Germanics. They're, at least among the European peoples, probably the most Tyrrhic, very outgoing, very industrious and organized people. Like you think of in Roman history, there was in the First Punic War, where they're fighting Carthage. These people didn't know how the fuck to build boats, basically. They had to build a fleet from scratch by like copying a fucking Carthaginian boat that got like washed ashore. And they did that. And they built like dozens and hundreds of these boats. And then because they didn't really know how to sail or anything like that, the boats just got they got caught in a storm and lost like 70% of their fleet in one fucking night, right? But what did they do? They just buckled down and built fucking more, right? Like they're just a very industrious people. The Romans made amazing administrators and bureaucrats. They're very traditionalist and conformist. Real sense of their own destiny, of concerned with justice and peace and everything. Romans are basically the ultimate traditionalists. I've talked before about the mos maiorum. Another sort of thing that they would do is they had this saying where if they wanted to say that something was really like close to the heart or very dear to someone, they would say id est antiquior ei. What they would say is it's ancient to him, right? So the past just had this sort of like power about it. It had an authority just because it was old, right? They're very, very traditionalist. That is to say. I mean, there are of course great men throughout Roman history. They're not totally Tyrrhic, but whereas the emblem of the Germanic religion is the king under the barrow, the emblem of Roman religion is the Fasces, right? Like the state cult built out of a whole nameless folk. It's the ancestor cult that really characterizes Romanitas, Romanness. And so why did the Romans conquer half the world? Because they could maintain and administer an empire because they were so Tyrrhic, right? It's kind of like the side of managerialism. There's like an anecdote about Genghis Khan, where after he conquered a bunch of peoples, it was told to him that, you can conquer in the saddle, but can you govern it in the saddle? Of course he couldn't, right? Because that's not the kind of person he was. That's not the kind of general he was. But the Romans could govern because they weren't really that much of a warrior people. They were more of a managerial people. And what made them so terrifying wasn't their fearsomeness or whatever. It was their organization, their discipline. They're like weaponized autism, basically. They're very, very Tyrrhic people. And it's the same with like Mediterraneans. They're very ordered, even though we have this picture of Italians as being this like fiery and passionate people that are just like, I guess, like really creative and irrational or whatever. It's not the case. They definitely have more of that Tyrrhic side to them. And that sort of explains why they don't go through these extreme shifts that we see with like the Germanic peoples, especially where,
you see like, that I'll tell you that stereotype in like everyday interaction. Like if you go and you interact with the Mediterranean, you'll be like, oh wow, that's a fiery, passionate person. But they are confined by their traditions, and I don't know, confined is a good word because it kind of has a like an imprisoning connotation. But they deeply respect their traditions, and a lot of it is nowadays it's boiled down to like their food and the way that they talk and stuff like that. They're very proud of how they speak their language. Their language needs to be spoken a certain way. You don't fuck with that. You can go online and see videos and videos and videos of people breaking pasta in half and Italians flipping out. Some kid cutting the prosciutto wrong and his grandpa has a fit. Like, this is important to them because this is their tradition. It's just like the Romans. It's like, this is old. You don't fuck with this. You don't change this. This is how we are. This is what makes us us. And that is part of, they're fiery and this kind of stuff, but their framework is completely Tyrrhic. And as you mentioned, if you read about the wars between the Romans and the Germanics and the Gaul and et cetera, the Romans had a lot of trouble with how they fought. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They had a lot of trouble. It was they won for the most part. They slowly, incrementally pushed them back until they built their wall out by the Rhine, and they're like, "Fuck, we just got to trade with these people," and let's just beat them with gold and wine and silks. You know what I mean? Because
it's a very Tyrrhic way to win, too, isn't it?
It was effective. It was effective in that kind of way.
It's very managerial and incremental, and in some ways, kind of. Yeah.
So when people say like the Italians of today are nothing like the Romans, it's kind of not true, except for like if there's a few figures like what was his name, Gabriele D'Annunzio or whatever his name was. He was kind of nutty. Like he was kind of Odinic. And some people would say that Mussolini was Odinic. I think that he was Tyrrhic and he was LARPing as Odinic. Because he was not very good at going and burning shit down and taking over the world and being that. He kind of just like repaired the system. You know what I mean? He was like, I don't know. What do you think about that take there?
Yeah. As far as like Mussolini is concerned and Italian fascism in general, I do kind of see it as like kind of an Odinic thing or whatever, because like one of the things that the Odinic Tyrrhic framework does is it makes sense of the radical right, the idea of a radical right in ways that the left-right paradigm just can't, right? Like we kind of tend to think of the right as conservatism and the left as progressivism roughly. And this is the historical understanding that comes out of the French Revolution. But that makes it very hard to understand how there could be a right-wing vanguard, right? Like maybe something like the German conservative revolution in the 20th century. But radical right is kind of a paradox. It doesn't really make sense. But if you look at it within the Odinic Tyrrhic paradigm, it makes this clear and coherent, right? Like, so the Odinic is neither right nor left. It could be either, right? The Odinic just refers to the great man or the founder or the creator-destroyer. The great man could be a creator or a destroyer, and he kind of is always both, really. So the Odinic right makes a lot more sense than to call ourselves the radical right, although the wider world is not going to understand what that means. But if you take Italian fascism, it kind of makes sense looking at it in an Odinic framework in a way. I mean, not to say Mussolini himself necessarily, but just the movement in general, because they were conservatives in a sense. I mean, the Italian fascists wanted to recapture the glory of Rome. They also wanted to found society on perennial things like hierarchy and nation and patriarchy and all these things that are just normal and healthy and good, right? But they also were not reactionaries. They were kind of modernizers. They were like these hard-headed realists that like characterized the Odinic man without much priestly sensibility to them. One thing that's a real mark of the Tyrrhic is a religiousness, a priestliness. And I don't see a lot of that coming out of Italian fascism. In fact, they butted heads very strongly with the Catholic Church. So, yeah, I don't know. It's maybe not Mussolini himself, although he was an interesting character because he's very like he was kind of an interesting thinker in his own right, like a philosopher, but also like he was the son of a blacksmith, so he came up from nothing and sort of like worked his way up and sort of like came from the fringes in a sense, like peasant stock, but also like he was not part of the intelligentsia like by birth or whatever. So he kind of came from the fringes. So there's maybe an Odinicness to that or whatever. But
yeah,
I think,
I guess he is kind of because Mussolini really just like made his way on his charisma.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? He was just a boss. You know what I mean? Like, he started out writing, and I read some of the translations of his early stuff. What was his magazine called? When he was still kind of a Marxist. Do you remember?
I think it's like Opera Omni or something. No, that was the later one. I don't remember what his earlier one was, but yeah, I know the one you're talking about. I just can't think of the name of it. So
yeah, it was something with an exclamation mark. It doesn't matter. But this was like just very kind of like basic.
It was
bitch.
Avanti. That's what it was.
Avante, yeah. It was it was pretty basic bitch, just kind of like revolutionary workers class kind of stuff. You know what I mean? It was like, it wasn't really anything that special. And if you read I know Giovanni Gentile wrote it, but apparently, Mussolini laid out some of the doctrine of fascism. It's not really anything that crazy. Like even if you want to read like the really intense, I'm sure you're familiar with a guy like Mario Palmieri. Like he was, he was more of an intellectual. Mussolini was not really that big of an intellectual. He was not a good military leader. He was just kind of like, that's what's interesting to me, because he wasn't really that good at stuff. He was just like a he was just like a big pee ass nigga.
Yeah.
he was good at getting people fired up. He fucked with the press. He was like, into sword fighting and horseback riding, and he was just machismo. It's believed he had all these mistresses. He was piping all these hoes. You know what I mean? If somebody fucked with him, he'd send his goons to go beat them down with canes. He was kind of a mafia guy. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I do see him as like a somewhat of an Odinic figure. There was definitely like the Italian fascists did have like a serious intellectual vanguard as well that included guys like Ugo Spirito and Sergio Panunzio and other guys like that. Just look at Mussolini's intellectuals. Read that book, anybody. I would recommend it. It's so fucking good. There's so much good stuff in there. But Mussolini himself, he actually had some kind of impressive stuff that he wrote, but like, yeah, he was not like at the top tier of that, but that makes sense because, he had a fucking country to run but yeah, so he's an interesting figure himself, but I definitely see Italian fascism as more Odinic because it's radical right, basically. And like the Odinic really makes more sense of that than anything else. And it also, like this paradigm clarifies the trad left, as I mentioned before. I think this is something that deserves to be underlined. So, I mean, just like the term radical right, the trad left is kind of an oxymoron. It doesn't make a lot of sense, but it's a logical correlate of the radical right. So, it's sort of like must exist by default. And it really does exist in a big way. We just don't see it. We just call it controlled opposition, right? Like it's basically conservatism. Mm-hmm. So the first thing to understand, and this is part of why the paradigm is useful, is that even the left, even the progressive, like revolutionary types or whatever, if you want to think of it that way, even the left has to maintain itself. It can't just be revolution all the time. It needs stabilizing elements to hold its like unstable coalitions together, this motley crew of like, different colors and everything. It needs a kind of handbrake to stop it from going, hey, maybe we should question the tradition from that straight to like, let's all cut our dicks off in one shot. It needs something to keep itself on the rails. And these stabilizing elements are what I'm calling the trad left. But again, the term kind of doesn't make sense. So if we think of it in terms of the Odinic Tyrrhic paradigm, if the Odinic is the great man and the Tyrrhic's the preserver, like even if you're this like revolutionary progressive you still need a preservative force. So you need something to consolidate the gains of your like loser ideology or whatever. This is the Tyrrhic left. So think of like Hillary Clinton is a Tyrrhic figure. Lindsey Graham is a Tyrrhic figure.
No.
Jordan Peterson is a very Tyrrhic figure. I'm not painting the Tyrrhic in a very good light here.
Give us some good guy. Give us some good Tyrrhics. Give us some cool ones.
Yeah. So, I mean, like I say, the Tyrrhic is the paradigmatic Tyrrhic is the ancestor cult. In some sense, the Tyrrhic is not really about a great figure. It's about a kind of it's about a priestly caste, like entirely, like all together. So, like as a Tyrrhic figure, you could think of something like Augustus Caesar, right? So here's a guy that like he followed in the wake of Julius Caesar, who was more of an Odinic figure. And Augustus Caesar, of course, you know, he didn't just inherit the position. He had to fight for it. But he eventually came out on top. And what did he do? He undertook a campaign of restoration, basically, within the newly minted Roman Empire, right? Like he realized that the birth rates were unacceptably low. So he took measures to correct that. He began a campaign of education to restore traditional Roman values and things. So he would be a great example of the Tyrrhic figure. The one that I think of, like the personality that is kind of the paradigmatic Tyrrhic figure, is actually Numa Pompilius, who is the second king of Rome. She's kind of a legendary figure, so I don't know if it really counts. It's almost like, you know, a god. But so basically, in the founding of Rome, it was founded by Romulus, who is the Odinic figure. Basically, he's one half, like he's a twin who like killed his twin and did a bunch of crazy shit, and like, you know, like lived off of, like suckled a she wolf, and then, like, you know, lived in the wilderness, came into the world, and basically just, like, you know, he's like the boss, right? Like he just came in and founded Rome, and then died some sort of a violent death. And then Numa Pompilius takes over. Numa is from this like neighboring tribe that sort of amalgamated to become the Romans. He's from the Sabines. And Numa is the opposite of Romulus. He's the one that established the state cult, established all the like juridical and like religious functions and everything in the state, whereas Romulus was more of a martial sort of founder. So anyway, Numa is probably like the archetypal Tyrrhic figure. But if you want to think of a historical figure that's really good, yeah, I think Augustus Caesar is a good one. But anyway, this trad left, which is kind of when the Tyrrhic starts to break down and get shitty. You know, Jordan Peterson is a good example. So he's like kind of a like deteriorated Tyrrhic figure. He's like, you know, Lindsey Graham and Jordan Peterson and Hillary Clinton, they're all left wing, right? And they're all doing the same thing. They're just holding the structure back from falling down. So like, you know, the NPC or the Bugman or the hectoring woke harpy, these are all like unfortunate, like deteriorated Tyrrhic figures. And I actually kind of like the term trad left as opposed to like Tyrrhic left, because it kind of underlines the insanity of Jordan Peterson calling himself right wing, but then like advocating for like Israel and gay rights and feminism and all kinds of other bullshit. So I think we should start calling these people trad left. I think it would confuse and enrage them, and it would kind of like force them to defend themselves in ways that they kind of right now don't have to. But anyway, yeah, this paradigm sort of clarifies that. Basically what I'm getting at is that the left has to have stabilizing elements, but it LARPs as revolution all the time. Like it can't admit that it's in charge. It can't admit that the left can't admit to being in driver's seat and being the sovereign. So it has to sort of like pretend like it's always it's like the insurgent revolutionary trying to, like, you know, BTFO the fascist Trump or whatever. It's the resistance is the word I was looking for.
Yeah.
They kind of have to LARP as the resistance or whatever. But if we think of them as like basically the traditionalist wing of the left, then it's very rhetorically hard for them to counter that. So yeah, I would. I think it's interesting that this paradigm basically brings that to light.
And you're talking about American presidents. I'm just thinking like what American presidents could be considered Tyrrhic, because it seems like the ones you mentioned, like you got the Roosevelts, Abraham Lincoln, George Washington. A lot of these guys are on the money, so everybody like remembers these guys. They were the ones that kind of like change things for better or worse. And you kind of forget about the other. I'm thinking like a guy like Gerald Ford. Like President Ford was, he wasn't anything real special. Like he didn't change anything, but it was like peace times. He was like a good president. Nothing bad, crazy happened, at least, off the top of my head. Another one, President Taft, Andrew Johnson, who came in like right after Lincoln, right?
Okay.
There's a bunch of guys that are regarded as good presidents that it was like peace times. Crazy happened. Everything was pretty chill. People were happy. It was prosperous. But unfortunately, those like guys don't get remembered. It's like the same thing. Like, and who was the guy that came after Aurelius? Was that Hadrian? Is that Hadrian came after Aurelius? I can't remember. But like some of those guys in that time period, this is like the what's it? I think it's called the 5 Noble Emperors or whatever. This time is regarded as the best time to be alive in human history. It was peace. It was great prosperity. People were happy. Yeah. It was like the best time to be alive. If you could press a button, you would want to be alive in that time and go back and just be a Roman during the time of the 5 great emperors. Nobody really wants to talk about them. They don't make Netflix series about these guys because like nothing horrible or crazy happened during their time. It's not as interesting or sexy or whatever. But you could argue that these guys were better emperors than Caesar or Augustus. You know what I mean? That these guys were better because they gave a better quality of life to the people, right? Because they were Tyrrhic.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's what you're supposed to do. Like that's what a leader is supposed to be most of the time. Like we can't always have like a revolution every 4 years when, the next president gets elected or whatever. Then you want stability. I mean, and this is something that, like gets a little bit like people kind of shit on that where it's like, it's not revolutionary or it's not like radical. Like you want to stay radical. Okay. Yes, we want to stay radical in the context of today when everything is terrible and basically we need to accelerate things towards a reset. But that doesn't mean that we should counter signal those like, what I'm calling normal time in history. Ultimately, that is in some sense kind of the goal. That's what a Romulus founds his society for, is so that it can live for 1,000 years in that state. Okay, nothing lives forever. Obviously, it's going to break down and all that. But yeah, it's like, this is what it's kind of like leading towards. In some sense, this is like the fruit of civilization that you're aiming towards, kind of thing. So yeah, I think that normality and traditionalism and, basically like oikophilia in some sense kind of gets a little bit of a short shrift in our circles, which is weird because you would think that the essence of nationalism would be being about what's close and familiar and kind of cozy in a way. Like I really liked some of the streams that were done. Like I'm still kind of working my way through Millennial, but like I've listened to a few of them right off the bat. And one of the ones I really liked is with your author, Anthony Cuthbertson, that where it was like, he's the one that runs Toadstool Mag. I think that magazine is really important. It's doing something very, very important in our circles. It's reestablishing coziness. We need that, right? Like it just can't all be revolution all the time. We talked about this in our pizza episode, where you need traditions. You need things that are sort of like close to home, that are familiar, and just like make you feel good about yourself and good about the world and your home and everything. We need that. And that's kind of like what Toadstool Mag is doing in a way. And this is a very Tyrrhic side of things. And it, you know, that it deserves to be celebrated. It may not be the sort of like have the grandeur of the Odinic and the revolutionary and the Caesar and the all of these figures, but it is just as important. We need both sides. If we don't have both sides, we're just basically autists, you know?
Yeah, I think you know, you know me. You guys out there definitely know what I'm about. I really believe that it's maybe I'm a Tyrrhic figure. I don't know, because I don't really have this interest in like going out and trashing and doing it. Blah, blah, blah. I think that we're kind of wasting time like fantasizing about these things when we should work within our bounds of what we can do and what we should do, which is create culture. And as you say, what I can't remember the phrasing that you use, but you say something like we have to like build a home. We have to build a thing that we can live in. You know what I mean? And that's something that I'm very interested in. I want to make stuff that we can live in. Like we're going to be here for a while. You know what I mean? It's like, I feel like we just got life sentences. We got put into we're in the clink all here together. Let's start making some food. Let's figure out how we can get a TV in here. Let's create a game night. You know what I mean? Let's like turn this shithole into a home that we can live in and have fun and enjoy ourselves and have something that remembers that we could pass down to our kids. Like, are we going to pass down to our kids that people like went to rallies and voted a certain way, or are people going to remember that? Like, I don't know. I have this great fear that people are doing things, that we're doing things. And, I'm also not in this whole we thing anymore. I think guys I'm not going, let's do individualism or whatever, but this whole, like, I'm just not buying into the idealism anymore. I think that the guys that have talent and have ability and have something special about them should create something that has immortality, that people can remember us by. I am very much somebody that's concerned with my legacy. I'm concerned with our legacy, and I'm terrified that in 50 years, all of this will be forgotten because we didn't create immortal things. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like, this is what culture is. Culture is something that's cultivated. It's something that's cultic, and the cultic is sort of the emblem of the tradition and the Tyrrhic in a way, right? Like, this is the ancestor cult itself is sort of the religious emblem of that. And culture is very much bound up with that because it's something that's passed on. It's something that has to be worked at. It's something that has to be cultivated, and it has to be forged and remembered every generation for it to be passed on. So yeah, I would like to see people doing more than just political theory, more than just activism. We need that, but we need other things too. We need culinary traditions. We need people doing things like sharing recipes. And, Patriotic Alternative gets a lot of this stuff right. Like, they do like streams where like guys are just like playing video games and shooting the shit, right? Like, they're creating real, genuine communities. This is great. And I would like to see more of that. And, if we want to sort of break it down into this paradigm, yeah, it's more of a Tyrrhic thing or whatever. But it's just it's part of normal time. It's part of like, yeah, we're going to be here for a while. It's part of like, this is our culture. It's not the big bang of the Odinic man coming and just like setting everything on a new foundation, but it's carrying forward the foundation that is being built and has been built into the future. And that's really important. You need that too. That's an important part of how we got here and how we're going to last and how we're going to actually make an impact.
And I also think that there's this important feedback loop. And you're reading your latest book that you put out, the Nick Land book, really has my gears turning about this. Nick Land is somebody that is very influenced by by art and fiction and like stuff. You know, you said on the thing, it's love. Dude, this guy is like a Lovecraft guy. You know, like he talks about Azathoth. He's got like mythos references all throughout everything he writes. It's like
Cthulhu swims left. I think that's a mold bug thing, but he picks up on it. Yeah.
He talks his whole thing about outsideness, dude. Outside, that's a love. He's like a cosmic horror political theorist.
Yeah,
you know?
That's great.
There needs to be this like, and what he's putting out there is like. This like the Nick Land stuff, although like I said before, I don't agree with all of it. Maybe he might be wrong on certain things, but just his presence as a whole is like, you know what I mean? So it's like there needs to be this feedback loop between culture and art and then feeding into the theory and everything like that, and then feeding back, because I'm reading Nick Land and I'm jotting down story ideas.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. You know, this goes back all the way. You go back and you look at like back in the day, dude. A lot of these, we talked about it during our last episode. This idea that, what was our last episode about? I can't remember. Psychedelics, right? You had Aldous Huxley talking with psychologists, and you had like political theorists that were buddies with the fiction writers, and it was like all of these kind of like thinkers across all of these different platforms feeding into one another, professionals, theorists, artists, etc., and they were all kind of working together to create like these bigger, grander ideas and movements and things. And we are very, very lacking in a lot of those aspects. We don't have like the professional. We have some. You know, I mean, for example, we have Tom from Survive the Jive, who's a legitimate anthropologist. You have Edward Dutton, who's a legitimate psychologist. I mean, we have some of that, and we have tons of theorists and everything. But it's like we are very lacking in artists, and this is something that I've been trying to bring into the fold and get people to. And here's something. This is not really part, but I want to say this to you guys out there that are listeners, that are enjoyers and stuff, like the guys that are observing and listening to our content. Please start rewarding guys that are creators. Stop only engaging with outrage porn. Stop only engaging with like videos of the latest trend and stuff like that, because start rewarding guys that are creating. Right? Don't just like go and like halfway listen to it. Oh, I like that. That's cool. And like not engage with it, because what that communicates to the artist, to the creator, is that nobody gives a fuck about what I'm doing. And the only way that I can even get some traction is if I just like start just like reposting fucking, outrage porn. And then everybody's like, oh, they never post about art, because they're not being rewarded for it. Come on.
Yeah.
I got to say that to you.
Yeah. It's absolutely true. I mean, you look at the traffic that like on Telegram, because you can see how many people have viewed each post and everything like that. It's always the outrage porn that, and the political stuff and the commentary that really gets traction on there. And maybe that's got something more to do with the platform itself. But like I'm subscribed to a few like Telegram channels that are like more about aesthetics and everything, and this is super important. To be honest, I'm subscribed to a ton of Telegram channels, and I just don't have time to read everything. So a lot of times I'll just there's 13 updates for this like one channel or whatever. I'll just be like, mark it all red. But there's a few that I like always look at and that I always read and everything. And a lot of times they're the ones that are to do with like poetry or art or whatever. There's a great one I would recommend for anyone to follow. It's called Atop the Cliffs, and it's by one of our authors, Arthur Powell, who is a great poet in his own right, but it's a poetry journal. It's not just his stuff. It's a lot of stuff. Poetry is really super important. This is a medium that has, as you say, Dave, it has foreverness. It's been with us since the beginning of time. It's still vital, and it still has like cultural currency and everything like that. I think that Arthur himself deserves a lot more exposure than he currently gets. As part of the reasons why we wanted to put out Horizons of Iron. But yeah, so give him a follow and reward people who are doing stuff to do with like culture. That's why we do this podcast. There's one channel that is more or less kind of like folded up now, unfortunately, because these folks are just busy with life. But it's called Heart of Europa, where they talked about like folk tales, and each one of their episodes is just a treasure, where they would talk about like different aspects of like folk culture and things like that. Like I love these like kind of like a little bit more out of the way like cultural content. If I'm sitting down to do my workout, a lot of times I'll like chuck on something like that, you know what I mean, to listen to, because there's only so much political stuff. And here's the thing, the political stuff is very ephemeral. It's here today, gone tomorrow, and you've forgotten about it, and it doesn't matter, and you don't remember it. How many like 14K views like videos about like the latest thing are just like never going to be viewed again, right? Like something like this Heart of Europa has like eternality. It has foreverness. It's going to be evergreen. So yeah, absolutely. This is the kind of stuff we need to do. It's very much more on the trad side of things, normal time, Tyrrhic, what have you. But that is as important as the Odinic stuff. It's important as the radical stuff that we're doing. We need to create traditions. Like the whole idea of radicalism is to start a new tradition and to begin something that lasts. So we like people. This is part of who we are as European peoples, is that we have both as Indo-Europeans. And in fact, I think it's the tension between the Odinic and the Tyrrhic, the founder and the traditionalist, that actually makes us unique. I mean, there is a bit of a tradition there a tension between the roving Mannerbunde, like pillaging and conquering, and the priestly state cult that's tied to a place. Naturally, those two things are going to be a little bit in tension. One of them wants to conquer horizons. The other wants to set down roots. But it's this tension between the two that makes Indo-European peoples special. I think that this is actually what gives us our unique genius as like a kind of group of folk, like a folk group. Not all the nonsense about like we was Bronze Age individualists that like really fucking sticks in my craw. That's not what makes us unique. It's this tension between the Odinic and the Tyrrhic. And that produces a dynamism that just flattens other peoples. It makes us the ideal modernists and the ideal traditionalists. It's why the Bronze Age Aryan Chad knew the songs word for word that his forefathers sang 1,000 years before. But it's also why he was kind of like at the cutting edge of technology, right? Domesticating horses, forging bronze weapons, and so on. And when you combine this, like this dynamism, this creative tension with our, as Europeans, especially high phenotypic variability, the fact that we're all one people, like as English say, but we look very different from each other, and we kind of have this like variability, that gives us yet more of an advantage, and other peoples basically just don't have a fucking chance. It's why like 45% of the world's population speaks a dialect of this small tribe on the Pontic steppe from 6,000 years ago. Yeah, they were nomads. That's part of it, but they were semi-nomadic. They had this dynamism between the nomad and the settled farmer that never quite got synthesized. And because it never did, it stayed productive and dynamic. And I think that this dynamic is why we are a unique people in history. So yeah, we need both. We need radicalism and we need traditionalism. And those two don't have to fit together. They do not have to like be synthesized into a coherent whole. In some sense, it's the fact that they rub up against each other and they're kind of like in conflict a little bit that actually is kind of one of our strengths.
Oh, yeah. All right, Mr. Mike, we are over 2 hours. You want to start wrapping it up here?
Let's do it.
All right, folks, I appreciate all you guys for tuning into this episode of Culture Dads. I know if you're listening now, you're already signed up, but just in case you're not, make sure to go over to imperiumpress.org and sign up for the Gumroad so you get lots of cool perks, man. Hardback books. Dude, I got a couple of the hardbacks, and I'll tell you, these things are beautiful, bro. These things are beautiful, beautiful books. I can't wait to, have them for the rest of the time. So go over and sign up and speaking of foreverness, get a copy of some of Imperium Press's works, which are very, very important, very big, and give them foreverness by getting a hardback copy. And the only way you can do that is by going over to the Gumroad and signing up, exclusive perks. And there's lots of other great stuff over there too. So go check it out. You get every episode of Culture Dads, which is every single week now. Go buy the new Nick Land book, Dark Enlightenment. Steel Storm 2 is out. I think Mike's got another book about to drop pretty soon. So, go buy books, man. If you're in the mood of buying more books, go check out the Bizarchives. Check out what I'm doing, bro. We got lots of great books over at the bizarchives.com, all in around $10 and under. So Bizarchives 1, 2, 3, and 4. Lots of cool reprints like Algernon Blackwood's The Willows, Man in the 25th Century. Lots of great. I got more reprints coming out. Masters of Horror Volume 2 is coming out. We got a reprint from the 1920s that hasn't seen the light of day in forever and ever. That's going to be coming out. Bizarchives 5. We got great works, solo works from our guys. A. Cuthbertson. You got, Cosmic Horror Double Feature, Spire. You got Shanghai Horror from Arbogast. You got Sacred Times from M.S. Jones. We got so much great stuff over there. So
you guys are stacking it, man. You're stacking up the content. We're amazing.
Stacking it. It's like flapjacks. It's coming. And we're going to drop 3 books this month. So we're coming. So follow Twitter and Telegram at the Bizarchives. Follow Imperium Press on Telegram. And I'll see you guys next time here on Culture Dads. Hails and blessings to you guys. I'll see you guys next time.